Thank you very much, Professor Solomon and Dean Richard, Chancellor Carroll, and honored panelists. I thank you for inviting a few of us corporate types to this honored event. I feel like my IQ is especially low when I come to an incredible academic environment, and you've got great government professionals and leaders, diplomats. Hopefully, what I'd like to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is give you a little bit of a sense of my story and why there's a special bond between the Silicon Valley and India. I grew up, I'm from Kerala. Anybody here? We got a few Malayalis in the house? Okay, good. The great state of Kerala, I think, has great food, great people, and I think they've usually voted often socialists and communists also into power. So there's something in common between all of that. But nonetheless, I grew up in Bangalore, and just a short view of my story. I at age 17 and 18, just like many of the high school students in Bangalore and any other big city, you have two tracks, at least in the 1980s. I graduated in 1987. You become a doctor or you become an engineer. I think now the world has become a little bit more diverse in India to those two professions, but I wanted to be an engineer. My mom was a doctor. We grew up in a pretty poor middle-class family, and my mom's path out of her poverty and her life and one of 9 children was to study. So the instinct that was taught me very early in life was if you had a good education and you worked hard, anything was possible. But I remember I was studying for the IIT exams. That's what I wanted to do, be an engineer. I got into IIT Madras, and my uncle, who had moved to the US and was living here, said, listen, there are a bunch of colleges that also accept you as an undergrad. It's very rare. Most people who've come here for education as a graduate student. So I applied to a bunch of colleges here with the hope that I couldn't afford it, but maybe I'd get a scholarship from some university. I applied to every school and got rejected. I didn't apply to Berkeley. Maybe I should have. But I applied to every school. And then this one small school that I'd never heard of, okay, in New Hampshire called Dartmouth, accepted me for computer science. I had no idea where New Hampshire was. I'd never been to the United States. And you know, there's a big difference in weather between Bangalore and Hanover, New Hampshire, okay? So I learned very quickly, and probably regretted in my first year, that I had made the decision to come here. I decided to come here purely because it was a good computer science program. I wanted to do computer science. But within 3 or 4 years, I got adjusted, and the human spirit just adjusts very quickly. Weather's the easiest part to adjust to. But I remember one small thing. I'll share this with you because there's such a big difference in our cultures. Today, people take many of these things for granted. I remember I'd never heard of this thing called Halloween. Okay, we don't do that in India, but I remember the first time I was living off campus in my junior year, and these kids came up to the door. I was living with a bunch of American roommates, and they mumbled something, okay? I had no idea what they were saying, and they put a big bag of chocolates in front of me saying something, right? They were saying trick or treats, but I had no idea. So what does an ignorant person do? I put my hand right in and took some chocolates. Because that's what I expected people did when you put a bunch of... My roommate behind me started laughing, and the kid's mom was standing at the end of the driveway, said, these guys are idiots. They thought I was playing a prank on them. But that's the way in which much of us have sort of come to the country, right? And I made the mistake of staying on the East Coast. I went to Harvard Business School for my MBA. I probably should have come here to the West because it's much better weather. And now I have been, in the last 25 years in IT, most of my career at 2 companies that are the leaders in the software industry, one in applications and infrastructure, SAP, a German software company. I spent most of my life there as president of one of the big divisions, and now I'm the chief operating officer of VMware. VMware is a very special story. It's the 5th largest software company, born out of some research at Stanford, and the fastest growing software company. We're now a 45 billion market cap company. And what we have done is revolutionized what's called the data center. And I'll talk a little bit about it, but much more what I want to talk to you are some of the things that you can all take away as experiences that I think are common, irrespective of what industry. This is not a pitch for VMware. In my spare time, I try to be a better dad and a better husband. I'm the father of 3 children, 11-year-old girl, Sophia, and twin 7-year-old boys, Alex and Jason. And my favorite time is telling them a story at 8 o'clock in the evening. And I try not to use PowerPoint when I'm doing that. Stories are better told without this. This is a good crutch to get the picture across to many of you. I think what's very special, as Professor Solomon talked about the Silicon Valley, and I think connects us to Bangalore or to Beijing or any other part of India that's innovating is innovation. And when you look at what's happening now, I came back after business school in 1997 here because Silicon Valley was starting to really boom. I came here in 1991 as an undergrad because I'd heard of this company called Apple, and I wanted to work there. My first job was at Apple. And today, of course, the notion of startups and unicorns and all of that stuff, the wealth creation is a side effect of, I think, a significant part of what technology has done to create a hub of innovation. And innovation has just one key thing inside it, and that's ideas. Ideas win. Ultimately, that can create wealth. But this is now the grand. I think the same thing is happening in India, whether it's in the private sector or in the public sector, and it's very encouraging. I have spent a significant amount of my time investing in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, in Pune. We have a significant part of our operations there, both at SAP and in our sector, one of the largest employers in India. And I get to contrast often the smart engineers that we hire in India and China and Sophia. And I think what's special about India is that same strand of innovation. Beyond innovation, there's certain things that tie us together, right? Education's a very high priority. My path out of poverty was education. What allowed me to come to the United States on a scholarship, there's no way I could have afforded this. 98% of my tuition was paid, and the last 2% I had to work in a dining hall was education. And I found when I got here, in my first year, just because of the preparation I had studying for the IITs, I was able to compete with third-year level people at Dartmouth College, an Ivy League college. It's the quality of the education that we have that continues to distinguish us, and many of you are proud recipients of that. The ethic, the work ethic, is something that also, I think, stands out. I'm not singling out just India. There are other countries, but I think many of us who've come out of poor circumstances know that we've done that through hard work. English, I think it's a key factor in which I often look to hire engineers. The communication barrier, even though it's 12 and a half hours, 13 and a half hour difference, the fact that we speak the language helps us often, even as we think about technology and hiring engineers there. And of course, key things to entrepreneurs is the ability to take risk. As a result, I mean, I'm just showing a few of the photos of some of the Silicon Valley and related tech people, probably Satya Nadella, Shantanu Narayan was mentioned. I just had a coffee yesterday with Sundar Pichai, who's CEO of Google. Many of these folks have done incredibly well. And now I think it's amazing that 2 out of the 3 large market cap companies in the world are run by Indians, Microsoft and Google. And that's an amazing tribute to our country. And if you look at, this is just a small sampling. I had a few other folks who are commonly seen on TV, like Fareed Zakaria. It's very proud for me when I see these folks, and I think they're paving the way for a global economy that's going to be run often by people from our country. And many of these folks have these things that are common in them. There's one thing that I will highlight that I think is increasingly going to become necessary among our leaders. That's humility. There's a lot of smart people in the Silicon Valley. There are a lot of hardworking people. But I will tell you, there's also a lot of hubris in Silicon Valley. It's unfortunate. And you can just look around many of the great companies and you see arrogance. And I think there's a new era of level 5 leaders that will stand out because of their humility. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. If you go back to the history of time, this was actually a good chart that my team got me for The Economist. And you go back to 180, you'll see the world was primarily India and China. This is the proportional GDP across the various different countries way back 2,000 plus years ago. And then over time, the blue is India, the light blue is China, and the rest are other various companies. All the way to like 1800s, it's like India and China. Okay, India and China in relative GDP. And then something starts to change in the 1900s. Okay? And I believe what's going to start happening 2014 onwards is it's going to come back to this key part. And this is a prediction of kind of what the forecasted economy is going to look like in 2030. If you asked this question in the 1940s and 50s, people talked about three countries: United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union. I have nothing against the United Kingdom. I have nothing against Soviet Union. But I think the conversation for the next 20, 30 years is going to be the United States, India, and China. And it's not, for me, many people make it an India versus a China. I think if all three of these countries can have a significant play in a partnership model to drive the future of the world, great things are going to happen. Okay? It's not one versus the other. There's too much of the one versus the other discussion happening, whether it's US versus China or India versus China. We've got to make this one where the triumvirate of us continue. The economy, what excites me about the economy is certainly the growth, and the government leaders here who are representing, I'm looking forward to hearing their comments. The more that we can help the country grow in that GDP growth rate makes it an attractive place for companies like VMware to invest. And the investments that are made not just in education, but also in infrastructure. We'd love to see the same thing that's happened in the telecom and the high-tech industry happen in road infrastructure and things of that kind, which I know is a priority of the government. And I think that as these new innovations, see, one of the things that happened when I studied was I skipped the entire mainframe era and I went right to client server as a computer science major. Okay. The new generation gets the chance to skip even client server and go right to mobile and cloud. And I think that's going to start happening in countries like India if you look at the millennial generation and where they're headed. Today for us at VMware, we have a significant investment in India. It is our largest offshore engineering investment. Many of the companies we acquire come with engineering teams there. It also helps that some of us senior leaders in the company are Indian. We have a little bit of a small bias to investments there. But it is competitive. Listen, we're looking to invest in engineering, and there's lots of other places we could invest. We could invest in Beijing, Shanghai. We could invest in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, just Delhi. We could invest in Sofia, Eastern Europe. And as we make these choices, some of the factors I talked about are very important. And we also like the fact that there's an ecosystem, the Indian SIs and many others that are forming. Let me conclude on this chart. This is what I talked about. And as much as innovation, and as much as all of the aspects that make companies successful and important, I talked about humility. And this is not talked a lot about because most of what's celebrated in society and also in the technology world is stepping over on top of each other to get to the top. Okay? And that happens in politics. It happens in the corporate world. I think one of the things that makes us special is the Gandhian philosophy of servant leadership. And I'm a big fan of that. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see I've talked a lot about that. And I think the next leaders, I was gratified to hear from Dean Lyons that that is a key factor to the way in which you've made Berkeley here special. And I love this poem. Let me end with this because I think it's highly inspirational. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and service was joy. Many of you probably heard this and read this poem. You're growing up, Rabindranath Tagore. It has inspired me every day. And when you apply the principles of servant leadership into the corporate world, which is almost unintuitive, because it's almost the opposite way in which a shark eats shark type of culture exists, I actually think you can actually not just be successful, but be incredibly happy. With that, thank you very much. I'll turn it back to you, Professor.